I've always had a strange relationship with death. Not fear, just detachment. Some people get queasy around funerals. I used to sit quietly in the back, more curious than stricken, wondering what lay beneath the coffin lid, what lingered after the final breath. Maybe that's why this job never felt as wrong to me as it should have. 3 weeks ago, I answered a listing buried deep in the gig section of a community forum. No company name, no contact number, just a short, clinical post. Caretaker needed for nocturnal maintenance of cemetery garden. Tasks include pruning, watering, observation, $500 week. Lodging included. Inquire by reply only. I was between jobs, couch hopping, and dangerously close to being completely broke, so I responded. An hour later, I got directions to a location. I'd never heard of Belarus Cemetery, about 15 miles outside city limits. No phone number, no signature. The next morning I packed everything I owned into a torn duffel bag and took the first bus heading east. No expectations, just a vague sense that if I didn't go, I might not get another shot. The cemetery was hidden behind a high, retiring gate wrapped in ivy. There was no sign, no welcome marker, no hours of operation. Just a narrow gravel road leading up to a stone cottage surrounded by a low fence. Beyond it, rows of old gravestones stretched into misty woods, their surfaces mottled with age. I found a woman sitting on the porch, late 60s, I guessed. Skin like cracked porcelain. She wore a gardener's apron, her hands streaked with dirt, a wide straw hat pulled low over her eyes. When I approached, she didn't look up, just gestured to the chair beside her. "You showed up," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a while. I did. She studied me with a stillness that felt practiced. "I'm called mRNA. I tend the grounds. You'll help. Nights only. There's a rhythm to this place." I asked her what that meant, but she just stood and walked inside, left the door open behind her. That night, she gave me keys to the cottage next door, small, dusty, filled with dried flowers hanging from the ceiling. Said it was mine now. Said I'd get instructions tomorrow. I didn't argue. The bed creaked. The walls groaned. I didn't sleep well. Around 3 a.m., I heard something, like soil shifting. A slow, dragging sound, roots tearing through dirt. I pressed my ear to the wall. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't in my head. The next morning, I stepped outside to find a row of crimson flowers blooming at the edge of a grave near my window. I swear that patch of soil had been bare the night before. I don't know much about flowers, but these weren't normal. The petals were thin and waxy, almost translucent, and the stems pulsed gently, like veins just beneath the skin. They pointed straight upward, like they were listening. Myrna said nothing when she passed by, just stared at them for a moment, then kept walking. That's when I started to feel it, that slow, gnawing sense of wrongness. Not fear, not yet, just curiosity, laced with dread. My second day at Belarus began with fog and silence. The graveyard never seemed to sleep. Even in daylight, the place held its breath. Wind didn't touch the trees. Birds never sang. It was like the air itself refused to move. Myrna met me just after sunset, near the edge of the central garden, a place where the graves sat closer together, tangled in vines, shaded by warped willows. Her apron was damp, stained dark around the hem. She handed me a lantern and a worn notebook bound in leather. "These are the rules," she said, without preamble. "Keep them, break them, and things start to notice." She wasn't being dramatic. Her voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. It was as if she were giving instructions on watering tomatoes. But something in the way she watched me, head slightly tilted, lips pressed together, made it clear this wasn't just tradition. She opened the book to the first page and pointed to a numbered list, each rule written in neat, slanted script. 1. Never pick a flower that grows directly from a grave. You may trim weeds and vines, but the grave flowers are sacred. Cutting them invites the attention of what's beneath. 2. If you hear whispers between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., do not respond. Keep your eyes down and keep working. They will stop if you ignore them. Point 3. Each grave has a nameplate. If one goes missing, report it to mRNA before sundown. Never attempt to replace it yourself. 4. The lantern must remain lit at all times. If it goes out, return to your cottage immediately. Do not relight it in the garden. 5. Do not tend to the back row, ever. 6. If you find fresh soil on your doorstep in the morning, sweep it into the garden gently and do not speak about it. Point 7. On the first Thursday of each month, leave a glass of water by the oldest grave. You'll know which one it is when you see it. I read the list twice, then looked at her. Are these symbolic? Some kind of ritual? Her expression didn't change. They're reminders. Most don't stay long enough to memorize them. You will. I opened my mouth to ask more, but she held up a hand. Don't dig for answers. The ground here doesn't like being questioned. And with that, she turned and began snipping vines from a wrought iron fence, moving with slow, careful precision. That night was my first shift, midnight to dawn. I carried my lantern and the rulebook, walking the rows as mRNA instructed. The air was heavy wet with the scent of moss, dirt, and something faintly metallic, like old blood in rusted pipes. The flowers glowed softly under the moonlight, red and white and deep blue, swaying without wind. At 2:17 a.m., I heard them. Whispers. They came from behind the gravestones. Dozens of voices, not loud, but layered, as if a crowd of people stood just beyond the veil of shadows, murmuring things I couldn't quite understand. I gripped the lantern tighter and kept walking. Rule #2. Do not respond. The voices followed me for what felt like an hour. I refused to look. My eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead, even when I felt the presence of something just at my back. Breathing. Watching. At 3:01, they stopped. No echo, no farewell, just silence, like the graveyard exhaled all at once. When I returned to the cottage just before dawn, I found a small mound of soil on my doorstep, fresh, dark, damp. It hadn't been there earlier. I didn't touch it at first, just stared. Then I remembered rule #6. I swept it into the garden, careful not to let it touch my hands. Inside, I sat for a long time, staring at the lantern as it flickered low. I didn't sleep. The next afternoon, I asked mRNA about the flowers. They're not planted, she said, pruning a rose bush beside the chapel wall. They grow when someone's ready, or when something else is. I didn't press further, but I started noticing something strange. The newer flowers, especially the ones blooming from freshly buried graves, seemed to grow faster, and some bent toward me when I passed, like they were listening or waiting. The rule book stayed beside my bed. I read it every night. I don't know what I expected when I took this job. A quiet life, maybe. Some peaceful distance from the world. But this place wasn't peaceful. It was watching me, testing me, waiting for me to make a mistake. It happened on my 5th night. By then, I'd memorized the rules, like scripture. They weren't just guidelines, they felt like a shield. As long as I obeyed, the garden tolerated me. The whispers faded quicker each night. The strange flowers seemed calmer, less alert. But routine breeds comfort, and comfort is dangerous in a place like this. That night, around 2:30 a.m., I was weeding a grave near the eastern gate. The headstone was cracked and unreadable, half swallowed by vines. The flowers growing from its base were different from the others, taller, bone white, their petals curled inward like clenched fists. I was careful not to touch them. But beneath the vines, something else caught my eye. A glint of metal buried in the soil. Curiosity got the better of me. I set my lantern down beside the grave and pulled gently at the vines. They peeled back like skin, revealing a nameplate I didn't recognize, one I hadn't seen listed in Myrna's logbook. It was tarnished and loose, half buried. Without thinking, I reached down and lifted it. The soil shifted beneath my feet, not sank, shifted, as if something inside the grave rolled over. I froze, my fingers still on the plate. A soft groan rose from the dirt. Not human, not quite animal, like old wood twisting under pressure. My breath caught. I set the plate down exactly where it had been. Rule number 3. If a nameplate goes missing, report it. Never attempt to replace it yourself. I hadn't replaced it. Not exactly. But I had touched it. Moved it. That counted, didn't it? I grabbed my lantern and backed away from the grave, nearly tripping over a stone behind me. The whispering began again, not around me this time, but from beneath. From the soil, it was clearer now. A single voice, low and rasping. Put it back. I dropped the lantern. Its light snuffed instantly. Total darkness swallowed the garden. I couldn't breathe. My hand scrambled across the ground, trying to find the lantern, the path. Anything but the soil was soft now, fresh, like something had just been unearthed. And it was moving. I heard a finger scrape the inside of a wooden box. Then another. Then the thump of knuckles against the coffin lid. Thump, dot, thump. I turned and ran, hands outstretched, heart hammering in my throat. My foot hit the path. I felt gravel. My bearings returned. I sprinted back to the cottage, slammed the door and didn't stop shaking until dawn began to bleed through the curtains. Later that morning, I returned to the grave reluctantly. Slowly, the nameplate was back where I'd found it, but something had changed. The soil was no longer flat. It had shifted, swollen upward, like the ground had breathed in, and those bone-white flowers, gone. In their place was a single red one, the exact color of blood. I told mRNA what happened. She didn't scold me, didn't even look surprised. Just sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. It didn't rise, she said quietly. That's something. Then she looked at me for a long time, longer than she ever had before. One more mistake like that, she added, and you won't get to run. The next few nights were uneventful on the surface, but something had changed. I started noticing that the flowers tracked me. Not like sunflowers follow light, but like they were aware. Their heads turned slightly when I passed, just enough to notice if you were looking close. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Then came the Thursday, the first Thursday of the month. Rule number 7, leave a glass of water by the oldest grave. You'll know which one it is when you see it. mRNA hadn't reminded me. She didn't need to. The rule had etched itself into my mind, same as the others. But I didn't know where the oldest grave was. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, scattered across the property. Still, I filled a tall glass from the tap and walked the garden just after sunset. The deeper I moved through the graves, the quieter the world became, like I was leaving behind time itself. Then I saw it at the far edge of the cemetery. Beyond a rusted fence I hadn't noticed before, stood a single stone taller than the rest, worn to near smoothness. The name was unreadable. The date, barely there. But the air around it was wrong still. Heavy, my hand trembled as I placed the glass of water at its base, and the moment I stepped back, the ground exhaled. I felt it in my chest, a deep, hollow breath. The flower growing from the grave, a black one, with curled edges like scorched paper, shivered gently. I didn't linger, but as I turned to leave, something behind the headstone moved. Not fast, not sudden, but deliberate. A hand, thin, pale, curling out from the soil and dipping a single finger into the water. The glass drained, instantly emptied, as if pulled into the earth. The hand withdrew. I ran. When I told mRNA, she simply nodded. It was thirsty, she said, brushing dried leaves off her porch step. That thing was alive, I snapped, trying to keep my voice from shaking, or undead, or whatever. Why? Didn't you warn me?" "I did," she said calmly. "The rule is the warning." That night, the whispers didn't wait until 2 o'clock. They began at midnight that time. They knew my name. They didn't chant it. They didn't scream it. They breathed it over and over, from every corner of the dark. Behind stones, beneath roots, inside trees that had no business being that close to the path. At 1:45 a.m., I saw something standing at the edge of the back row, the place Renee told me never to go. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me with a head slightly tilted, like it was trying to remember who I was. My lantern flickered. For a second I thought it would go out. I remembered rule number 4, never let it extinguish in the garden. I lifted it high, whispering apologies under my breath, to no one in particular. My hand was trembling so badly, I almost dropped it. Then the figure turned and stepped backward, disappearing between the graves. The whispers stopped, but the smell lingered, earthy and rotten, like fresh mulch mixed with something dead. That's when I truly began to believe the rules weren't about superstition, they were boundaries, and something was pressing against them, watching me from the other side, just waiting. For the moment I slipped again. After the Thursday offering, I couldn't stop thinking about that hand. It wasn't just the way it moved, it was what it represented, a buried thing responding to my action. That glass of water hadn't been symbolic. It was consumed, and that implied hunger, need, cognition. Something was aware beneath the soil. I needed answers. mRNA wasn't going to give them. That much was clear. Her responses were always cryptic, vague, deflective. The rules were her language. If I wanted to understand the truth behind this place, I'd have to find it on my own. The cottage I lived in was old, but not empty. There were books scattered on crooked shelves, yellowed pages filled with botanical sketches and Latin names I couldn't pronounce. Under the bed, I found boxes of tools, shears, spades, old gloves, hardened with time, and in the closet, behind a stack of blankets, I discovered something more interesting. A locked metal file cabinet. It took me 3 nights to find the key. It was taped to the underside of a drawer in the kitchenette, hidden beneath a cracked jar of pickled roots. Myrna must have put it there years ago, before I arrived, maybe before she even lived next door. Inside the cabinet were papers, dozens of them, some handwritten, some typed on faded letterhead. They weren't organized, but they all shared a common subject: Belarus Cemetery. The earliest dated back to 1923. Journal entry: a Kellerman, October 19th, 1923. The soil here is wrong. It breathes. You can't tell from the surface, not unless you sit still for hours, but I've felt it pulsing, like it remembers things. The first grave bloomed a month after burial. The petals matched the deceased's birthmark exactly. There were dozens of entries like that, first-hand accounts from past caretakers, grave workers, even one who claimed to be a gravedigger's apprentice. Many of them stopped abruptly. No final entry, just silence, like the writer had vanished mid-thought. One note, scribbled in frantic pen on torn paper, caught my attention. D.O. Not give them names. The flowers grow faster when remembered. Another. I saw one open, not bloom open. There were teeth beneath the petals. It was absurd. It had to be. And yet, deep down, some part of me accepted it without protest. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd felt it. The hand, the whispers, the drained water. These weren't metaphors. They weren't hallucinations. They were symptoms of something old, something buried, something alive, and maybe not alone. Near the bottom of the cabinet, I found a worn folder labeled Departed Staff Incidents. Inside, personnel records. Most were thin. Hired, quit. Nothing unusual, but 4 files were marked with a red X. Name: Alton Reeve. Position: grounds. Assistant. Date of departure: NA notes. Failed to follow watering protocol. Replaced broken lantern in the garden after extinguishment. Missing since June 14, 1977. Name: Thomasville. Position: apprentice. Caretaker. Date of departure: NA notes. Attempted to dig up rear row grave to verify depth. Last seen 2:03 a.m. prior to full moon. No remains found. 2 others read similarly. All of them ignored at least one rule. All of them vanished. I sat on the floor with the papers spread around me. Outside, the wind picked up. Dry leaves scratched against the window like fingers. Suddenly, something occurred to me. The rulebook mRNA gave MIT wasn't handwritten. It had been photocopied. Copied. From where? I flipped through the back of the folder and found a brittle envelope taped shut. Inside was a photo, sepia-toned and curled at the edges. 7 people stood in front of the chapel. mRNA was one of them. Younger, smiling, but what chilled me was the inscription on the back. The last full staff before the roots spread. There was no date, no context, just those 9 words. The phrase stuck with me: before the roots spread. That night, I walked the garden again. I wasn't working. I wasn't pruning. I just wanted to see. And when I crouched beside a grave and pressed my palm to the soil, I felt it again. That slow, rhythmic pulse. The earth was breathing. I jerked my hand back and stumbled to my feet, heart pounding. In the distance, one of the flower heads slowly turned toward me. Not the wind, not gravity, intention. I returned to the cottage, locked every window, and pushed the file cabinet in front of the door. It wouldn't stop anything, but it made me feel like I was still part of the world that obeyed walls and locks and human rules. What scared me most wasn't what I'd found in the records. It was that everything in them seemed incomplete, like the writers had only scratched the surface before they disappeared, and whatever lay deeper had been waiting. The following night, I didn't go outside, not even to check the flowers. I kept the lantern lit in the center of the cottage, the rulebook beside me, the metal file cabinet still wedged against the door. I told myself it was just precaution, that I wasn't truly afraid, but I was lying. The soil had moved under my hand. I hadn't imagined that. The flowers had turned. The water had been taken, and now, something was moving. It started just after 1 a.m., a soft rustling, like footsteps through dry grass, echoed beyond the cottage walls. I turned off the radio, held my breath, listened, then 3 slow knocks against the back wall, not the door, the wall. I stood completely still, 1, 2, 3, then silence. When I finally dared to step to the window and lift the curtain a crack, I saw nothing, just fog. The garden beyond, eerily still. No movement, no wind. I stayed by the window until dawn. mRNA said nothing the next day. She only handed me a pair of gloves and gestured toward the main chapel path. To Graves Need, clearing flowers overgrown. I wanted to tell her about the knocking, the file cabinet, the breathing soil, but ID and single quotes, too. Not yet. At 11:47 p.m., I lit the lantern and returned to the garden. Against every instinct screaming in the back of my mind, I forced myself to do the job. If I stopped tending the graves, what would happen? Would the flowers grow out of control? Would they spread? I started with a simple site-low headstone, minimal vines, no flower clusters, just dirt, damp and spongy from last night's fog. I clipped, cleared, swept, all quiet. Then I moved toward the second grave MRN had pointed out. It was farther from the main path, deeper into the cemetery's wooded edge. The grave was covered in a tangle of red flowers, dozens of them, thicker than I'd ever seen before, pulsing slowly in unison, as though the entire patch were a single organism. I crouched and reached for the vines surrounding the headstone, and then the lantern flickered. My breath caught. Rule number 4. The lantern must remain lit at all times. If it goes out, return to your cottage immediately. Do not relight it in the garden. I stood slowly, heart racing, as the flame dimmed again, then steadied. I could feel it, something watching me from behind. I didn't turn around, but I heard it shifting, breathing, heavy, like a massive creature, trying not to move too fast. Every flower bent slightly toward it. The ground beneath my boots vibrated. Not an earthquake. A heartbeat then. Behind me, a low groan rose from the earth, and another, and another. 3 graves to my left had begun to stir. The soil caved inward, then bulged outward. A bloom of black flowers erupted from one in seconds, like blood splattering upward in slow motion. I ran. The lantern's light stretched and pulsed as I sprinted between the headstones, dodging branches, not caring what I trampled. Behind me, I heard something chasing, but it wasn't footsteps. It was roots, slithering, grabbing, wrapping around stone and soil with wet, sucking sounds. Something ancient, hungry. A vine caught my ankle. I fell hard face first into the dirt. The lantern skidded away and extinguished. Silence, total, smothering silence. Then, whispering, dozens of voices, no hundreds, all around me, chanting my name, repeating the rules. But they were wrong. Twisted. Pick the flowers. Look into the back row. Speak to us. Relight the lantern. I crawled toward it, hands shaking, fingers bleeding from gravel and thorns. I knew the rule. Don't relight it in the garden, but I had no choice. The darkness was thick, alive. I struck the lighter once, dash nothing. Again, dash spark. No flame. Then a click. The lantern burst back to life, and I saw it, standing over me, not human, 7 feet tall. A body made of vines and bone. Faces woven into its chests, creaming faces, locked in silent agony. Its arms dragged like roots, long and clawed, dripping soil. Its face was a hollow mask of bark and petals. It didn't speak. It simply watched, and as the lantern's flame grew brighter, it recoiled slowly, stepping backward, its limbs twitching with displeasure. The roots beneath me loosened, and then it vanished, not into the mist, into the soil. Like a snake sliding back into its burrow, I limped back to the cottage, locked the door, collapsed onto the floor, shaking. I didn't sleep, didn't even blink. By morning, I'd only managed 2 thoughts. 1, Myrna knew that thing was out there, and 2, the rules weren't meant to protect the garden, they were meant to protect me. I waited until the second night after the encounter to confront her. Mrna, the one who handed me the rules with that calm, impassive face. The one who said don't dig for answers. Now I knew why. Because she'd already done the digging and buried the truth. Beneath layers of ritual and silence, I found her tending to the chapel's rose wall, pruning with those same old rusted shears. Her hands were dirty, always were, but now I looked at them differently, like they had planted things she didn't want found. I saw it, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She only paused, slowly wiped her blade on her apron, and sighed. You relit the lantern. I nodded. It nearly pulled me under. Still, no surprise on her face, only wariness. It lets you go if you're not ready yet, she murmured. It prefers those who've broken the rules more than once. One's too curious, too clever. My jaw clenched. How many others, Myrna? How many assistants before me? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked inside the chapel. I followed her. The air inside was cooler than outside, stagnant. Dust hung in lazy beams of sunlight. The pews had long since been eaten by rot, and the altar was bare for a metal basin filled with water that looked wrong. Too still. Mrna walked past it and pulled open a wooden hatch behind the pulpit. A staircase led downward. Come, she said. You should see. The tunnel was narrow, carved straight into the rock and soil. Old lanterns hung from nails in the wall, but none were lit. I used my own. We walked for what felt like forever. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a chamber, no wider than the chapel above, but filled with what I first thought were rootstick. Pale strands webbing across the ceiling and floor. Then I looked closer. Hair, human hair, long coiled and matted with soil. Dozens of skulls lined the back wall, their eye sockets filled with flower buds, red, black, and white. In the center of the room sat a stone table. On it, another book, bound in stitched leather. I stepped closer, opened it. Inside were names, dates, all the previous caretakers. Next to each name, a flower type, a method of death, a final note. Some were labeled claimed, others swallowed. One just read, bloomed from within. I turned to Emma, heart pounding. What is this? Her eyes were damp. For the first time since I'd met her, I thought I could teach you the rules. Thought if you followed them, you'd be spared. But the garden chooses. Not me. You lied. No, she whispered. I tried to protect you. I slammed the book shut. What is it, Myrna? The garden, the flowers, that thing in the woods. Her voice was thin, barely audible now. This place feeds on memory, grief, flesh. Every grave is an offering, every flower a tether. The deeper the sorrow, the stronger the bloom. That's why we make the rules, not to contain it, but to slow it down. I stared at her, breath caught in my throat. You knew I wouldn't leave once I started learning. She nodded once. That's why I chose you. Those words hit me like a cold slap. Chose. Double quotes. You wanted me here, I said slowly. You needed someone to take your place. She didn't deny it. She only stepped back toward the stone table and lifted her sleeve. Her arm was wrapped in vines, not around through piercing skin, threaded with blossoms, blooming from inside her flesh. They've already begun growing in me. She said, that's the price of staying too long. I can't leave anymore. The roots know my name. She smiled, but there was no joy in it, only acceptance. They're starting to forget yours. I turned and ran. Back up the stairs, out of the chapel, through the garden. The flowers didn't follow me, but they turned, all of them, their heads tracking me. As I passed hundreds of blossoms, all tilting slowly toward the path like petals craning to hear a name they'd nearly forgotten. I didn't sleep after what I saw in the chapel. How could I? The vines growing inside her, the names in the book, the skullsage, one a former caretaker swallowed by the soil, by the rules. They broke or obeyed for too long. Myrna hadn't just stayed too long. She belonged to the garden now, and if I didn't leave soon, I would too. But it wasn't that simple. Rule number 4 rang in my head like a bell. If the lantern goes out, return to your cottage. Do not relight it in the garden. I broke that rule, and the garden let me live. But what if it wasn't mercy? What if it was patience? What if now it was waiting? That night, I packed everything into my duffel, what little I had. Lantern, lighter, rulebook, the folder from the cabinet, a flask of water. I left just before midnight. I didn't say goodbye to mRNA. The moon was high. The garden was silent. No whispers, no wind, no movement. That terrified me more than anything else. Still, I walked the path slowly, holding the lantern close. Its light flickered, but stayed strong. At the gate, I stopped. The air felt thicker, there like stepping through syrup. Every instinct in my body screamed to move. Run, but the path was gone. I turned around, and the cemetery stretched endlessly behind me, row after row of graves, flowers blooming in rhythmic waves, as if breathing in unison. The gate hadn't vanished. I had crossed. SOMETHINGA. Threshold. A line drawn not in chalk or stone, but in time. Memory. The garden didn't want me to leave. I took a step forward. Something shifted beneath the soil behind me. I turned on, saw movement by the chapel mRNA, or what had once been her. She wasn't walking. She was gliding, feet dragging, vines trailing behind her like wedding veils made of rot. Her face was pale, sunken, but her eyes glowed faintly, like they remembered too much. I lifted the lantern. She stopped. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, I heard it, not from her, but from the flowers. They were whispering, all of them. Stay, tend to us, let us grow. And beneath that chorus, another voice, my own, calling from beneath the soil. I fell to my knees, because I remembered something. A dream I had weeks ago, my first night in the cottage. A field of flowers growing from a single grave with my name on it. It hadn't been a dream, it had been a warning. I looked down at my arms, my hands, there beneath the skin small bumps. Not mosquito bites, not scratches, buds, just beneath the surface, tiny blossoms, not yet opened. I was running out of time. I stood and did the only thing left. I broke the worst rule of all. I walked into the back row, the one mRNA told me never to tend. Rule #5. The forbidden graves were ancient, some of them barely marked, others completely overgrown. The air was wrong here, hot, wet, like breath on the back of your neck, and in the center stood a single grave with no flowers at all, just soil, fresh, untouched, waiting. I knelt beside it and did something unthinkable. I dug, not deep, just enough to breach the surface. My fingers touched something warm, wet, pulsing, and the earth screamed, not with sound, with sensation. A pressure in my skull, my chest, my bones, then silence. The grave pulsed once more, then stopped. I stood, dizzy, unsure of what I had just done, and then the fog parted. The path to the gate reappeared, clear, unblocked, like the garden had blinked. I didn't wait. I ran, didn't look back, didn't breathe until my feet hit the gravel road outside. Behind me, the lantern flickered once and died. I never went back. I didn't tell anyone either, not the sheriff, not my sister, not even myself. On the nights I lie awake and hear wind brushing trees that shouldn't grow this far from the garden. I moved across the state, found a job at a hardware store, kept my head down, kept my arms covered. But even now, months later, I still feel them. The buds, tiny knots beneath the skin, dormant, but present, like seeds waiting for rain. Sometimes they itch, other times they pulse. I've tried doctors, scans, blood work, all clean, but I know they're there. I know what they are, and I know one day they'll bloom. I thought maybe I could forget. Then, last week, I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a folded page, torn from a notebook. No words, just a hand-drawn map. The same trail I walked that first night, same garden path, same gate. But now one grave was circled in red, my grave, the date on it, tomorrow. I burned the letter, but the image won't leave my mind. It's etched there now. I've started dreaming, again, vivid, suffocating dreams. Flowers growing from my eyes, vines threading through my ribs, my own voice calling from beneath the soil. The last time I had those dreams, I hadn't yet stepped into the garden. Now, I wonder if I ever really left. Maybe the graveyard doesn't need fences. Maybe once it marks you, you carry it inside. A wandering seedbed, a walking bloom. I haven't slept in 2 days. The buds are starting to ache, and this morning, when I looked in the mirror, there was dirt beneath my fingernails. I hadn't been outside. I don't remember digging, but something does. Something remembers me, and just now, right before I sat down to write this, a single black flower bloomed on my windowsill. No soil, no pot, just petals, soft as memory, and roots curled around a scrap of paper. 5 words, written in the same red ink as the map. The garden never lets go.